"This is a story about him and her," said the stallion on the broadcast, "and you were confused because you were expecting this from someone named Pierce or Squeak. Greetings from Duskmire. This is a story about him. He is a stallion of average build and height, blue eyes, a brown coat, and a darker brown mane. He wears a childish grin upon his face much of the time, but garment-wise, he is currently donning a red bow tie, a white dress shirt collar and matching shirt cuffs, which all stay in place reasonably well despite the rest of the dress shirt being noticeably absent. He also holds a strange pen-shaped device in the shirt collar for quick obtainment with his hoof when it is needed. On his flank is an hourglass-shaped symbol of gold with clear blue glass and bright yellow sand. At the right angle, it looks as if the sand is moving within the hourglass on occasion. Also of note is an associate that follows him, because this story is also about her. Her name is Rose Petal, and she has a red coat and strawberry blonde mane. Her eyes are green, and she wears a simple gold necklace and matching bracelet above her front right hoof. She also wears a hair clip in the shape of a rose in her hair, to keep it from covering her eyes. Also of note, her face tends to wear either a disapproving scowl or a smile of reluctant acceptance, usually due to the nature of the stallion's actions of childish and naive rambunctiousness. At this point, the stallion is currently trotting through a central cylinder in a vast room filled with an array of monitors, a majority of which have a test signal of 3x3 grid of black-lined circles filled with red, blue, and green colorations, like the side of a die with 9 pips, all of different colors. These colors alternate between these spectrum options in unique patterns with meanings only the stallion can decipher. There is a control panel on the cylinder in the center of this strange room, which is littered with a number of handles, buttons, and levers. The stallion is currently fiddling with a rotating knob and a hoof crank in an attempt to settle the room's unbalanced movement. He explains that the navigational gyroscope was off-kilter in the region of Equestria they were visiting, for reasons of either interference. They implying the stallion and his mare companion. He spoke rather matter-of-factly about the turbulence and its correction, but Rose did not want to hear any of it. Due to the fact that she personally could not care less about how their mode of transportation worked, she responds with a chide remark, comparing the highly advanced machinery of the room with that of an arcade machine combined with a toaster oven. As the room slowed its rocking, there is a strange noise comparable to the sound of brakes, if their use of friction was focused not on solid matter, but on reality itself. The stallion and the mare stepped over to the door of the room and exited. Outside of the room was a vast and remarkably dense forest of dark trees, so dark that the greens and yellows and blues of all the leaves are almost onyx in color. As the door closed, the mare looked back at the strange box the room was in. Despite the vastness of the room they were in previously, the blue box is rather diminutive in comparison. During their first encounter together, her first remark was that it looked a bit like 2 troughs stacked on top of each other. He corrected her by stating that the home, the hoof-operated multiversal explorer, he added, was given the appearance of a police stable, commonly seen lining every other street corner of the country of Great Britain. When she asked why it looked like something from Great Britain instead of a local Manhattan equivalent like a phone booth, he simply stated that the ether-powered disguise array was malfunctioning and he was unable to repair it. During her recollections, the stallion was waving around his strange pen-shaped device, which glows a bright purple. He explained how it worked in more detail once before, but the only part she understood was when he summarized it as an artificial unicorn horn, pretty much. The pen stops glowing, and he puts it back into his shirt collar. He mutters something about the ether levels being frightfully high some point farther along in the forest, and then he grins widely. She gulps audibly in response. She was all too familiar with that grin. This was the grin that preceded the stallion's sudden burst of energy and trotting away in a ludicrously dangerous situation, with no plan, no need for caution, and no thought of future action, at which point in the story occurs immediately as the thought transpires. With little else to do, she trots after him with a rapid pace. But for some odd reason, she is able to catch up with him rather quickly. The stallion was once again fiddling with his pen device, which was giving off an odd cacophony of white noise. She inquires regarding the awful tin just what is going on with the device, as the pen begins to flicker. He taps the device on his other hoof in an attempt to correct the incandescence and the hissing noise of static. But just then, the static begins to clear up until the story can be heard by the mare and the stallion through the device, just as the static begins to clear up so that the story can be heard by the mare and stallion through the device. The mare is rather worried to hear a broadcast that was exposing all details of their current travels through the ominous forest toward a certain unknown origin of energy, and she feels even more uncomfortable as the broadcast audibly mentions the discomfort. Inversely, however, the stallion is excited by the prospect of finding the source of the broadcast. Imagine, he begins to ramble, that such a form of magic exists that allows one to perform cognition so accurately. Cognition, she begins. Don't you mean precognition? She inquires. Oh, no, good mare. Precognition implies accurate prediction of future events before they happen, hence the prefix. Cognition, however, states occurrences in real time as they occur, and regardless of the cognitor's current location. So even if you are unable to witness the events directly, you could cognate events via the variety of spell. Oh, the narrator is even saying what I'm saying at this very moment in time with what I'm saying when I'm saying it right down to audio inflections. My goodness, this is brilliant. He. He giggles like a school filly, and then giggles again, as his first set of giggling is being recited by the narrator of the story, who then decides to stop because it will continue to cycle. And then, much to her chagrin and irritation, the stallion trots off remarkably quickly once more, following what is presumed to be the pen device's successful attempts at tracking the broadcast signal, reciting the story about him and her. Once again, he suddenly stops, and once again, she catches up to him. She was certainly used to such action at this point, despite it only occurring a second time, as the stallion was just as lacking in attention span as when they first met. And yet she still finds him remarkably suspicious. This is most likely due to the fact that she knows very little about him. Until only recently, all she knew about him was that his name, or the name that he gave to her, was Sans Otaim, that despite appearing to be a normal pony, he was not born on Equestria, but another planet entirely. She had already suspected he was of extraterrestrial nature when a medical friend of hers examined him during their first encounter and determined that he had 2 hearts. However, she was not told the name of the country he was from, let alone the planet, why he left that planet, and why he even wanted her along for his little joyride. The only other thing he had told her was that this was his first jaunt to Equestria as a whole, and that she was the first pony of that world he had ever met. Her second recollection of their introductory meeting was cut short as she ran into him from behind yet again. Before she was able to gripe about getting tired of bumping into his flank, she was able to notice the reason he had stopped, even before she could inquire of it. In front of the two of them was a remarkably large wall of energy. It was neon green, with red lattice overlaid upon it. Without hesitation, the stallion prods it with the tip of his front hoof, which quickly bounces off with a soft crackling noise and a brief stint of fetlock immolation. He blows on the flamelet in his singed coat and waves his pen at the device, which cuts off the live audio broadcast, due to the machinery in the device being allocated to another task. He looks at the glowing end of the pen, and then nods, as if sagely. "Yes," he begins, "this barrier is certainly unusual. You recall our first meeting, when I happened to arrive in your area of Equestria, during some time after that invasion of those hive-mited pony insect hybrid things. What do you call them? Changelings?" He waited for her to nod in response before continuing. "Right, changelings. Well, I managed to pick up the odd wavelengths of ether present near changelings when they transform into their pony disguises, and this barrier is chock full of the stuff. What's even more interesting, though, is this," he says, pointing a hoof at the red lattice patterning. "There appears to be a secondary energy here that I am unfamiliar with, represented by this. It is like unicorn magic, but remarkably stronger. Perhaps... could it be alicorn magic? No, that implies that this wall was made by a changeling and an alicorn working in tandem, and the encounter we had with them earlier on makes that scenario seem rather improbable." "Doctor, if you're done rambling on, I'd like to note something," Rose begins to say. "If this magical wall is here to keep every pony out, then it might be worth noting that if we try to get in, then they will more than likely be incredibly angry with our intrusion, and you just made an opening with your sonic horn just now, didn't you?" She looks into the now visible hole in the magical barrier, and she notices the brown hoof extending toward her, as if to say, "Are you coming or not?" She then gives off a slightly smug grin, as if proud that she was able to predict his seemingly random behavior, and follows the hoof through the hole. She does so in a gait that pantomimes, "Some pony has to keep you out of trouble." Her snidely action is cut short as she manages to take note of the environment around them. The houses are all rather normal from her perspective, save for the strange opaque crystalline columns hovering over each house with no suspension appearing to be near them whatsoever. And by looking up to notice them, she also noticed something else entirely. There is a remarkably large rake stuck within a large number of them, with what appears to have a significant number of its tines going straight through a series of homes and buildings. That in and of itself was odd enough, but the most frightening thing from her perspective is the even larger and much more imposing towers. The stallion looks a bit puzzled over this and speaks in kind. "I admit the rake and the termite mounds are a bit strange, but I've seen stranger. Goodness, we've seen stranger. Remember those giant amoebas filled with teeth and ingrown hair and such? The ones that tried to eat us?" She immediately turns around to exit the same hole she entered in, but to no avail, as the opening is now missing from the magical argyle wall. Her fear is warranted to her perception, however much the stallion thinks she is overreacting. By thinking quickly, he checks the broadcast coming out of his pen to determine her worried nature. The broadcast frequency kicks in on his pen device just in time to hear the narrator exposit about the reason behind her sudden terrified expression. She recognized the alleged termite mounds, but they were not home to termites. They were home to the same creatures that were mentioned earlier, changelings. Stallion mentioned the usage of changeling magic in the barrier certainly made her suspicious of the area already, but the entomological spires had confirmed her fears. As the stallion had briefly mentioned before, changelings had once invaded the land of Canterlot, where she was vacationing at the time. It was during that invasion that she learned 4 things about them. First, changelings have the ability to transform themselves into any pony that they have seen before, and if they have enough skill, they are capable of transforming into ponies they have not seen. Second, their diet consists of love and affection of others, with their feeding being assisted by their ability to transform. The stallion is already aware of the existence of such creatures, let alone any form of creature with the capacity to consume energy, so he is rather familiar with the idea of an alien species' potential capacity to consume emotion. The third thing she had learned from her horrible vacation was the true form of changelings, a strange fusion of insect, vampony, and zombie. The key features include a black exoskeleton and a colored carapace highlight that can allow one to determine to whom the changeling drone is loyal, as well as matching colored eyes in accordance to the shape of the aforementioned carapace related to their duties to the changeling hive they are assigned to. But the one visual description she recalled the worst of all were the fangs. They were technically classified as tusks by the scientific community based on their placement, but that didn't matter to her at the time, as she was still remarkably intimidated by her first initial encounter with them, and more so from her perspective from within a feeding pod. And the fourth and final thing she had learned was that she may have somehow managed to get over her fear of spiders during her vacation. It was replaced with a yet more severe fear of insectoid equine replicants. Nodding in response to the completion of the narrator's exposition describing her memories of the traumatic experience, he slides closer to her and rests the underside of her neck on the overside of his, in an attempt to console and calm her. "You will be fine," he says. "I will protect you. I made a promise long ago that I would protect any pony I met who needed it." And before the narrator of the story had a chance to describe the scenario he was recalling, the stallion quickly taps his sonic horn, and the broadcast is silenced from their perspective. However, their story is not yet over at this time, and so the narrator will continue to audibly relate it to its conclusion. The stallion and the mare enter the local market, and the nearby ponies look at them with a worried look on their faces, but overall oddly unworried about the remarkably obvious new faces in the area. The mare takes some calming breaths as they walk, and she tries to pass the time by observing the things she sees and the ponies she sees. For instance, there is a stallion with a coat that appears to be made of birch bark with a mane of green maple leaves, whom is harvesting fresh fruits and vegetables from his tail. There is a bright green filly with a brown mane that appears to be trotting about happily in a plastic, transparent bodysuit for some reason. But the mare comes to the conclusion that this little filly is somehow made of candy after catching the scent of green taffy and chocolate licorice. There is a pony of dark blue coat and golden mane that appears to look like it is made of solid gold and hair fibers, donning a golden necklace with the national symbol of currency, and a solid diamond tooth. There is also what appears to be a crystal pony of a soft blue color, but for some reason wearing a cloak to cover most of his body, possibly due to the fact that from his hooves' appearance, much of his internal organs are very visible. There is also a remarkably slender, ivory-coated, long-maned pony whom she cannot tell is a mare or stallion at first glance, though after noting that each side of this pony's flank has a different cutie mark, one with a circle with an arrow, and another with a circle with a plus symbol, respectively on either side, she confirms that this pony's androgyny is that special something that his and or her cutie mark represents. That is rather strange, she mentally notes. Aside from the remarkably large number of ponies of varying shapes and sizes instead of varying mane and coat coloration, every pony certainly does have interesting cutie marks here. They all look similar slightly, as if they were all crafted by a mathematician instead of the usual grand trans-dimensional being of unknown power and ancient age that rewards one with a physical representation of the achievement of self-knowledge and appreciation printed on their left and right buttocks. It is about to this point in the story that a triad of ponies approach the stallion and the mare. The three ponies are all wearing silver-colored skin-tight jumpsuits with matching face hoods. These hoods have a single black question mark embroidered upon it centrally, with the upper half of the loop of the symbol arcing where the pony's eyebrows would be if the hood was not obstructing their faces. They also seem to have horns, but rather than a straight conical shape, it curves slightly upward. The three ponies, the frontmost of them appears to have a short cylindrical device with a large dot on their particular mouth, steps forward, and in front of the left pony, the pony that is not tall, and the right pony, the pony that is not short, and they hold up a badge with the symbol of a snake eating its own tail encircling the image of the tallest spire in the area with overimposed, menacing-looking eyes. Said individual requests that the pair be escorted by them to the leader of the city, with the sound of his mechanical undulating vocalizations exposing the cylinder's function as a vocoder. The mayor is slightly alarmed about all of this and looks at the stallion for some sort of signal to run away, or for him to pull out that strange white card that he claims to have the property of altering the perception of others with whatever he wants them to see, perhaps his sonic horn device. But he simply nods and beckons the mare to follow him. He explains succinctly that the signal that appears to be reciting their every action is, in fact, coming somewhere from this town, and that it is very likely they were aware of their arrival for quite some time, which explained the odd level of calmness from such seemingly paranoid residents. Therefore, he continues, if they want to destroy us, or some such thing, why not do so much more covertly? A pair of ponies falling down dead in the middle of a busy market with no reason behind it would be a fairly clear sign of the power of the current ruling party, wouldn't— Ow! He is quickly silenced with a painful-looking strike to the back of his head as one of the two remaining silvery ponies, the one that is not tall, points forward in a gesture to continue moving. The other one of the two, the one that is not short, verbally adds that not only is it rude to claim that the covert law enforcement agency of the city of Duskmire is in fact not very covert, but it is also rude to imply their malevolence as well. Regardless of the statement's accuracy, the pony adds quietly, with a combined tone of sincerity and an almost recited sincere nature. This inclusion does not help to calm down the mare, but it certainly does help that the stallion is side by side with her, close enough for her to hear his 4-count heartbeat. The entrance of the spire that they are walking toward has a string of letters written vertically to its left, which reads, Spire of Monarchy. The stallion whistles as he looks up the length of the massive structure. Just then, there is a tiny white dot of light that grows in diameter until there is a bright orange portal of halation. They are let inside, where they are greeted by what sounds like elevator music from a speaker embedded in one of the corkboard ceiling tiles, a linoleum floor, 2 plush couches, and 3 chairs of matching fabric, pattern, and color, and a desk. At this desk sits a mare with a mane that appears to be made of some kind of slightly torn aquatic plant. She is wearing a pair of thick-rimmed rhinestone glasses with a beaded chain connecting them behind her neck. The mare is using a file to further round out a tiny exposed hole in her hoof. Holding both of her hooves out at 4 lengths reach, each hoof appears to have matching points and curves like a bisected heart symbol that becomes a full heart when she clasps her hooves together. She then claps her hooves together and tells them to please wait for their political appointment with the Queen. Beyond the tone of the calming music is the sound of the narrator, whom is yet to stop telling a story about him and her. The stallion giggles to himself again, and then giggles once more, as the narrator references his giggling. The narrator then once again willingly stops doing this, because this would artificially increase the length of the story, and not only has the story gone on for far longer than this broadcast's usual time frame, His desire to take care of his recently adopted daughter slightly outweighs his desire to perform his duties as a local radio host, and more currently, as this story's narrator. It is not enough to stop the story, however. This is because the story is not yet over. The stallion notices the mare with the glasses does not seem to be the same as most other occupants of the city, and inquires of her species rather directly, not as a demand, but more with the inquiring tone of a 4-year-old colt that is yet to grow out of the phase of their life when they ask so many questions that their parents take to drinking copious amounts of fermented fruit juice and biting down solidly on salt licks. She responds by saying that changelings are not real, and that even if they were, Queen Lycra Spandex has made it a strictly enforced law not to claim otherwise until next month. Before the stallion has the chance to ask the species status of the queen, the mare in the glasses quickly covers her mouth with her hoof. She once again states that changelings are not real in a much more stern tone of voice, and states that Her Royal Majesty Queen Lycra Spandex is incredibly sensitive to the topic specifically of her species identity and changeling equality preferences, for reasons that may or may not be obvious when their meeting begins. As the silvery pony that is not tall motions for the mare and the stallion to follow them deeper into the spire, the mare in the glasses warns the stallion not to bring up the topic out of respect for Her Royal Highness. The mare gulps and stammers out a request to stay outside before the pony that is not short suddenly hisses from right behind her and causes her to trot right immediately next to the stallion she currently accompanies. The 4 ponies walk together in a line, with the one that is not tall and the one that is not short, respectively, in the front and behind the mare and stallion as they move upward through a winding staircase. As they move upward, the stallion begins to notice the green coagulations that are used as an adhesive for the flooring and wallpaper, and inquires about them. In an almost rehearsed manner, as if they knew he would ask this question, days in advance, they respond that the spires of the town are from an abandoned changeling hive once belonging to the almost mythical Madame Tullet. Not knowing who this mare was, Rose Petal explains that Madame Tullet was once known as a prodigy of ballet prancing and was seen as the pride of her town, but on the day she obtained her cutie mark, she began to change, not simply in the sense of a filly reaching marehood, but much darker and much, much more painful. It turned out that her late mother was once a changeling queen, and her father was not her father at all, but the drone assigned to leave her in this town and give her the necessary knowledge to convert the population into her own drones. As it then turns out later, her love of dance presented this opportunity, for it is in her unique lineage that by feeding upon their admiration for long enough periods of time that her audience would change as well into her loyal subjects. But unlike many other changeling queens, she couldn't do such a thing to these ponies, whom she not only genuinely cared for, but whom also cared for her as well. So, in an act of benevolent sacrifice, she ran away from them all to protect them from the creature she would become, building the 5 spires of the city from her own ichor for a new home, created as a simple reflex of genetic memory. But she never germinated her own brood, and instead left the hive herself to occasionally feed on passers-by by disguising herself as a breezy queen. The stallion begins to piece together the information he has obtained, and is now left with a final requested inquiry. Madame Tullet didn't happen to be, half changeling queen and half alicorn. His escorts stop in mid-step to look at him with a stern glare. I mean, he continues, it would explain her mode of compassion, her sentience, as changelings tend to hold hive-mind connection with each other, the combination of 2 magics infused upon the barrier of the city, and the fervent desire of the populace to deny the existence of changelings. Stop, researcher. The stallion is cut off mid-sentence by those 4 slightly muffled syllables. The direction of the voice is just ahead of them. The hallway opens up to a grand room, wider than the hallway, 3-fold, so tall that the pillars of congealed endoplasm paced every few meters are not just for design, but for necessity. At the opposite end stands a throne. The back of the ornate chair is tall as the same pillars, and presumably made of the same material. The stallion stares with interest at the throne, draped with shadow, intrigued at the source of the interruption equally as much as the meaning behind the message. The one silhouetted upon the seat stands and slowly trots toward him. A rather tall and dark pink mare, with her neck, curved horn, and the lower half of her legs all covered in blue ribbon, presumably elastic to a degree to allow proper speech. Well, it's certainly been a while since I've been called that, but for the time being I'm on holiday from my namesake. I'm simply exploring the lay of the land with my friend Miss Rose Where is she? The inquiry is said with a tone of volume. His past speaks echoes of violent threats made manifest with the vibration of his throat, unintentional or otherwise. Rest assured, researcher, no harm will come of her. We are aware of her phobia, certain aspects of your origin, and the procedure of which you will assist us. The stallion tenses further and further during the Queen's speech, teeth bared. The separation between the upper and lower jaw is a slim outline of a jagged zigzag. As he described. He also said you would be more than likely threatened with "there it is." Her train of thought is interrupted by the glowing device aimed at her throat. Did I ever say that I intended to hurt her if you didn't do as I requested, researcher? No, I did not. I also stated that we are aware of her phobia and are making sure she is comfortable in the most literal of senses. We designed this community to protect those that have no home elsewhere for whatever reason that may be, and now that home has the potential of compromise, as your existence here has made apparent. All we ask is that you help us protect our home. I am sure you would more than likely enjoy preserving all of these potential subjects of research. Be quiet! He roars the words like an outcry of a lion protecting its territory. I am not a researcher anymore. Lives are not test subjects, and that's a fact I do not wish to learn redundantly. He puts the device away and glares daggers into the perforated creature before him. Now what in the name of Tartarus do you want me to do? At this point, the story will briefly follow her, as the stallion will be walking a significant distance to reach his destination, and simply stating this for approximately 5 minutes would be boring. The mare, whom is being escorted by the pony who is not short, is being led to a room with black doors, dripping with a sharp-smelling substance she cannot identify. As the doors open, she shields her eyes from the insinuated terrors within. But as her eyes open, she finds that the room lives up to her expectations, albeit inversely. Her retinas begin to ache from the sharp color of the pink wallpaper, the bright white frills on the matching furniture causing slight snow blindness, and the fancy carpeting with the mosaic pattern of a hummingbird alight on a tulip. Her confusion intensifies as she notices a single other pony in the room, donning a maid's uniform, nearly every part of her body wrapped up like a mummy in white ribbon, and a single porcelain mask covering the pony's face. The maid pony asks forgiveness in a polite manner before bowing and introducing herself as Gentle Breeze, the head maid of Queen Lycra. Apparently, the Queen had requested minutes ago that she wear the mask and cover herself as best as possible to ensure the comfort of her guest. When asked why, Gentle Breeze began to add, hardly hesitant, and stepped back a few steps, before asking the mare's preference in tea as she prefers the hot water. A second pony enters the room, a stallion in a simple, full-body tuxedo and a porcelain mask over his face, who silently sets down a plate of sliced fruits and lettuce sandwiches for the guests to imbibe if she so desired. With the tea in a dainty white cup, the mare carefully lifts the container to drink the dark amber liquid, and she is pleasantly surprised at the taste. While she could not see Gentle Breeze's face, she could tell from her body language that her host was quite happy with her culinary prowess. At this point, the stallion finally makes it to the northern communication spire. The slow procedural metamorphosis from biological to technological within the top 5 floors was not unknown to him either, having seen similar combinations of biology and technology earlier that century. At this point, he takes note of a transparent wall containing a single desk with a microphone centered on it, in front of which is a blue unicorn stallion with a green mane, whom is now narrating something that the stallion isn't able to hear from outside the room. With a small wave of his pen device, it begins to pick up the radio broadcast. The stallion takes note of the speech, synchronizing with the blue stallion's moving lips. He would have stayed longer had the pony, who was not tall, begun to nudge him forward to continue further down the hallway. At the end of the long hallway is a large door with a sign reading, "Danger, Scrying Room, Authorized Personnel Only." The pony, who is not tall, nudges the door open with a hoof, and the stallion enters the room, which is glowing a green, ominous glow. The interior is filled with a vast array of crystals connecting to an assorted wiring that feed into a central cube of solid opal, its coloration fluctuating at an alarmingly erratic pace. The pony, who is not tall, motions to the device, and the stallion waves his sonic horn about it with a nod. He slowly walks around the device until he pauses at one particular area, where he hears a soft buzzing noise. Closer inspection reveals a single bright blue glowing insect nestled in a bed of frayed wire. On occasion the insect convulses and turns a bright shade red, but aside from that everything seems normal. The stallion inquisitively prods at the intruding specimen before deftly plucking it loose from the wiring and using his sonic horn to levitate replacement parts over to... As the wires are reconnected, the story resumes being audibly transmitted, not because of a loss of power, but because, for some odd reason, the removal of the wiring has caused the narrator to engage in a brief stint of paralytic unconsciousness. His work seemingly done, he exits the room and is escorted back downstairs toward the throne room of the Spire of Monarchy. Rosepetal resumes munching softly on a sandwich of sliced strawberry between slices of angel food loaf and reading a surprisingly out-of-date magazine before she hears voices outside the door. Curious, she silently sneaks just to the left of the doorway to quietly listen. She cannot quite make out what is being said, save for a stern, deep voice chastising a quiet, higher-pitched voice for not fascinating. Higher voice for not fastening her bandages more securely. When the voices get close enough, she quickly trots over to the sofa she was reclining in and sits down to stare intently at the page she was previously reading. The doors open again, showing a familiar pair of ponies, the maid pony, Gentle Breeze, whom appeared somewhat unsettled for some reason, and the stallion in the tuxedo. Both are still wearing their porcelain masks, and both bow politely to inform her that her friend has finished the task requested of him, and that she is to meet him back at the throne room with the two of them as her escorts. With the butler in front and the maid behind her, the three ponies trot in a line toward the throne room. Suddenly, there is a brief clattering noise and a quick yelp. The mare turns to see what the noise is, but before she can notice anything out of the ordinary, the stallion butler jumps over to her and blocks the field of view as he softly speaks to the maid. The mare cannot quite exactly make out what is being said, save for the maid repeatedly apologizing for not fastening her mask tightly enough as well. As they continue down the hallway, she slows down intentionally to inquire to the maid about her well-being. The reply she receives is unusually vague, and she then decides to ask the reason behind the two wearing masks. The stallion interjects to explain that the two of them are very unique along with everyone else in the town, and that the queen, in her graciousness and understanding, has allowed them to work for her in exchange for requiring a respectful and honorable uniform for the two of them. He then strongly implies that they may be late if they do not hurry, and that the queen would not like that, and so they proceed forward once more. The mare and stallion meet at the same time at the throne room. The masked stallion and the pony, who is not short, are on the queen's right, while the masked mare and the pony, who is not tall, is on the queen's left. Between the two rows stand the mare and the stallion in front of the sitting queen. The mare and the stallion bow slightly. The queen steps down from her throne and overlooks the two, contemplating them both. And before anyone knows what is happening, the two have been concussed against the back of their necks and left unconscious on the floor before her. The queen nods at the pony who is not tall and the pony who is not short. The pony who is not tall begins to brandish a remarkably imposing survival knife in their mouth, gleaming and sharp, while the pony who is not short pats the pony who is not tall on the neck and shakes their head horizontally to indicate a mistake in their choice of work accessory. The pony who is not short then corrects them by lifting up a large burlap sack, and the masked mare and stallion lift each of them, the non-masked mare and stallion, into the burlap sack with a loud buzz. With a loud spark and flash of magic, the sack containing the mare and the stallion that this story is about are now gone, and the aura from the Queen's horn recedes. This has been a story about a mare and a stallion. The narrator then talks about the day's events, followed by a series of editorials about his personal life, including his date with his self-declared mare friend, details about a disliked family member's attempts to resume his bakery duties, and a remarkably saccharine anecdote about his daughter's first ballet recital going off without a hitch. Stay tuned next for 2 uninterrupted hours of the phrase crush, kill, destroy, swag being chanted over and over again by over 3,000 dorks and nerds. Good night, Duskmire, and good morrow. Greetings from Duskmire is a non-profit fan podcast based on the podcast Welcome to Night Vale and the television series My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic is owned by Hasbro and created by Lauren Faust. Welcome to Night Vale is produced by Commonplace Books and created by Joseph Fink and Jeremy Craner. The creator of this podcast recommends you check either of these out, though would prefer that you enjoy Welcome to Night Vale a little bit more, or separately. As you may have noticed, combining the two causes strange and terrible consequences. Thank you for listening.